change the school calendar? Some of these answers can be yes, and some might be no. Some schools can say, you know what, we can't change our calendar year. Okay, and some can. But if you can't, that doesn't mean you can't do personalized learning. It means within our parameters, what can we do to make some of these systematic changes that trickle down into providing more personalized learning for students? So how can you organize your system in a way that places the students at the center of every decision instead of what's convenient for the adults? So that's what a lot of sites are starting to look at as they look through their strategic planning in this shift. I also want to point out, like, we're talking about student-centered learning and personalized learning for the end user of the student, but also with school improvement, what's important to us is also your teachers are also students. So when, you know, I've sat in professional development meetings, I've led professional development meetings, and we tend to do mass instruction, direct instruction, and whether you need this information or not, everyone has to show up in the auditorium at the same time and get this information. So one of the things we want to look at as you're making your strategic plans is how are you going to engage your students into personalized learning, but also what are you going to do for your teachers? Because you have some teachers that are fabulous at technology and some that may not even know how to use their school email. So they have different professional development needs. So looking at student-centered and personalized learning also extends to tailoring the professional development for your teachers, because they also have different needs. They also have a different voice and choice, and they also have a different pace and place for what they need. Okay, so personalized learning for students and teachers is more classroom. Student-centered is more the systematic change. One of the things, and we're going to just kind of take a look at one of the schools that we have partnered with to help as they move through their process. And again, these are things that you can start to think about with those systematic changes, is what does even the physical classroom look like? Some schools can't change their classroom at all, and some can. So we looked at those down the history lesson of what classrooms look like. And, you know, the more modern today was they were in groups. So what a lot of schools are doing too is they're getting rid of desks altogether, or they're putting their desks into groups. But this particular school was literally able to knock down walls, and they did make a multi-age classroom. They allowed voice and choice. If you see in here, some students are, working together. Some are working independently. You can see that they're using technology. Some are not. If we take a picture, or if we look at the other end of the classroom, you see there's couches. Some kids are choosing to, you know, get a little comfortable. And then I have a lot of people ask me, okay, this is great. This looks nice. It looks inviting and engaging. But do the kids just show up and it's a free-for-all? You know, we hear about this voice and choice, so they get to just choose whatever they want to learn. Again, it's still in that transformation process. It's learning, how do you teach what's required to teach by the state, by the district, yet allowing students to have that choice within those parameters of what they have to teach. So looking at how are they working independently and meeting the needs of what's required, but allowing the pace. So in this particular case, that's why technology is a great tool. Remember I said it doesn't equate personalized learning, but it's a tool to help with personalized learning, if that makes sense. So here they're working during this time, during independent time. So independently, they're working on what that particular student needs. So whether it's those 3 kiddos on the couch, they're all doing different things based on their competencies and their mastery level within the parameters of what is required to teach. And then you see the teacher with the student. And this particular site, they have started to do student-led conferences. Remember I mentioned baby steps of going towards personalized learning. Student-led conferences is a great way to start. So the teachers start to learn how, or start to teach the students how to pull the data from technology to say, hey, what are you struggling with? So I'm just going to pick on someone in the audience. So if I said to Bridget, if I was your teacher and I was meeting with you, I could say, Bridget, let's pull up your data, and you could tell me what is it that you're struggling with? What is it that you did really well this weekend, working on this week? And then Bridget can start to learn how to communicate that information using the data and then explaining that to the teacher. And then they together coming up with a learning plan. So each of these students should have a learning plan that's unique to them. Again, that can happen through the technology. That could happen to just how the teacher documents it. You'll also notice on the wall where they have evidence and then targets we hit. So students got to set their own targets. Now, as the teacher, you're kind of like in a circus, you're the leader of the circus, and you have all these different rings going on. So you're managing what targets they need to hit overall. It's the teacher's job to make sure that those get presented to the students. But with personalized learning, students can kind of wiggle, waggle, and navigate to their pace of how to get there. So if Bridget was a little bit behind in our conference, then we can say, okay, you need to be here. Do you think you could be to this point by next week? Can you learn these vocabulary words by next week? Do you think we can do extra practice to work on double-digit addition? Whatever the skill is, the teacher and the student are working together. And again, it helps with that shift of ownership from the teacher back onto the student, because the student's owning what targets they need to hit. And then they also need to show evidence. So it's not a free-for-all. The students have to show what they know, and that could be through the technology, it could be through projects, it could be through direct instruction, it could be through good old-fashioned assessments, or a wide variety of this. So again, that's where the teacher comes in. So they're really moving, the teacher's role is moving from the sage on the stage, as I mentioned before, to you're really becoming a coach and a mentor and helping each student navigate their learning, as well as helping them understand what kind of learner they are. So not all students are great online learners. Not all students are great project-based learners. It doesn't mean they can't do it. It just means they have to kind of learn how do they learn best and what medium works best for them. And then how do they work in the medium, even if it's not their personal preference. Like I met with a kiddo one time who's like, I don't like to work in groups. So a lot of times he got to choose to work individually. But in reality, when we get out into the world in college and in our jobs, you have to work with other people. So the teacher still required him to work in groups, but he did get choice sometimes. So that's kind of what I'm referring to. I'm going to walk through a couple of examples. Again, these aren't, the end all be all to how you can have your classroom set up. It's just to get you thinking of some different ways to set up your classroom. I mentioned when I showed the original picture of the public schoolhouse. We think about, Little House on the Prairie, the one-room schoolhouse, multi-age students, and we're kind of used to that in the lower grades. Kindergarten has centers. Sometimes there's multi-age, but we don't think about that so much for older students. With personalized learning, really, I've seen a lot of successful classrooms where no matter if it's kindergarten, whether it's 5th grade, or whether it's 10th grade and above, having centers. So you have a combination of direct instruction, independent practice, independent learning, and some type of project-based work or collaboration. So it doesn't always have to be a project, but some kind of collaboration. Again, we want to teach those 21st century skills to students and get them comfortable at working with people. And then they would rotate. So having students using technology for their independent learning and or teacher-created resources or their textbooks or a combination of all, working independently to practice those skills. Teacher might do direct instruction as a whole group, but also maybe even small group instruction based on pulling data on how students are doing in their independent learning. Maybe have a group of students that are really struggling with fractions. So I'm going to pull and do a direct instruction mini lesson on that. I have another group that's excelling. So I'm not going to do a whole group lesson on fractions. So that direct instruction center could be whole group or small group. Okay. And then they rotate. Another idea, and this could be looked at two ways, is you could have one classroom and you could have students doing multiple content areas. So maybe Devin is working on his math, and maybe Edna is working on her language arts, and maybe Steve is doing social studies. So you could have multi-content in one classroom. And this is, again, where technology is an assisted tool in that. Or you could look at this as one content area, but different skills. So maybe this, like if we're looking at middle school or high school, maybe this is math, but you could have geometry, you could have algebra, you could have pre-algebra, you could have algebra 2. So students are working on what meets their needs. And then you can be pulling students for those mini direct instruction lessons. And it doesn't have to just be math or language arts. It could be any content area. It could be, you know, a variety of electives as well. I worked with a school where this is how they had their setup, where, you know, the teacher was a social studies teacher, so everyone in the room was working on what they needed for social studies. So it was multi-age, and then she would pull and have small group instruction depending on the content area. Or not content area, the particular course. Another way to look at this, and this is some schools that might have changed some of the culture. So they've looked at how to do their bell schedule, or maybe got rid of bells. But you could do this in a variety of ways. So we have our different content areas by the different colors. And maybe a student who is in their English class or the language arts class physically gets up and goes to math. Like maybe they have what they need in language arts. Maybe they don't need a direct instruction course, or maybe they finished their project and they need to go work on their math. So they can physically get up and go to the math classroom. Maybe they've just connected better with the math teacher and they prefer to work in there. So that's one option that we've worked with schools on. Another option is maybe they're not physically getting up, because I know that there was probably a deep breath of panic with some of you out there when you thought, oh my gosh, my students would just be free walking around. And I know that, again, when we go to the parameters, that might not be something you can do at your site. So instead of physically getting up and going to another classroom, you could think of it as what they're working on. So that student who is in language arts or English class, they didn't physically go to math, but they started working on their math in English and language arts independently, and that's okay. They just would not participate in that particular day of English because they have what they need. They're either understanding it, they're where they need to be on their competencies, they're done with their work for, you know, they might be ahead. Again, remember, it's that voice and choice and pace and place as well. Some schools in this setup where you see silent labs, they almost have a physical space where students can then just go, almost like when you think about college. You know, students can kind of come and go, and then they can work independently or in small groups in the silent lab. They also have collaboration hallways. Another thing is, it's not personalized learning, but it's also teaching those skills. Is some of the sites that we've worked with that follow closer to this model is teaching students, if you get a phone call, how to excuse yourself out of the classroom and go into the collaboration hallway, or, you know, wherever they can go to take that quick phone call, and teaching them those skills that they would need in college and career, as simple as something with a cell phone. And then continuing, a math student might be wanting to work on social studies, again, physically going there, or also just with their curriculum, but not leaving the classroom. And then eventually you have, as I mentioned, that controlled chaos, which is a good thing, where students are owning their learning, they're working on what they need, and they feel as if their needs are being met because that's what they needed for that day or that time period. Okay, one last model is looking at, I've had questions before where people say, I have asked, okay, that's great, but how do you know that they're getting higher order learning? So this diagram just kind of helps with that, even with those centers, is looking at, you could have group A where they're working on their digital content or whatever content the teacher has provided. And that's kind of the co-teacher in the classroom. That's what's great about technology and digital curriculum, is it's kind of having like a helper in the classroom. So they're working on that independently. They're building those skills of the knowledge. And then in their small group or direct instruction, that's where they can start applying and analyzing. And then when you do the collaboration and the projects or the activities, that's when you're getting into the creating, the evaluating, the synthesizing, and all of that. So within that controlled chaos, you have these different levels of learning, so that you and the student know that they're really getting that transfer of learning. They're understanding it, and they're able to explain it and produce it. And like in that one classroom, they're able to show evidence of it. I'm going to stop quickly and see if, David, if we have any questions.
We do have a few questions. Let me just read off one. It says, question from Mary asks, do you have a sample of a schedule of a school that is doing personalized learning?
Yes, we can provide that. I don't have it up here right now, but if you're talking about how, like just a bell schedule, or are you talking about calendar year schedule?
I'll find out.
Okay.
One more question is, what does initial instruction look like in a personalized learning environment?
Great question. So again, that can be how you want it set up. So if you're using some resources, the initial instruction could be direct instruction. I mean, it could be kind of traditional. It could be using the independent time, almost like a flipped model where the students are independently working on it, and then they're coming to the whole group or the small group to reinforce what that initial instruction was.
The question from Tim is, how is this different than differentiated instruction?
That's a good question. There is, let me think of the, Tim, before we're done, I'm gonna get the name of a book that has an outline of it's a template, a chart of individualization, personalization, and differentiated instruction. So typically with differentiated instruction, it's still teacher created. So you're kind of taking away some of the voice and choice and the ownership. It's still the teacher telling the student or group of students what they're going to do, what they're going to learn. And so it's more teacher directed than personalized learning.
And Veronica.
And then I see that, oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say Mary wrote that it was both calendar year and bell schedule year. So Mary, I don't have that up here, but we can certainly get you a sample of it. I believe you have an email when you registered for the webinar, so we can get that to you from what some of our experiences are.
And then Veronica asks, when grade levels are removed?
Go ahead, David. There was another one.
Yeah, when grade levels are removed, what age range is considered appropriate in the same setting?
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me? Maybe my audio's gone offline. Can you hear me? We may have lost audio. Let me pause 1 second.
David?
You can't hear me, but I can hear you. So. So yeah, so you can hear me, but doesn't appear that Jen can hear me talking, but the rest of the audience can. Let me communicate with her really fast.
Hello?
Jen, can you hear me now?
Hello? I can, yes.
Okay, good. There was a minute there
Okay,
where
sorry everybody.
I could hear you, but you could not hear me, and the audience could hear both of us.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, that's another reason we love technology. It's a love-hate relationship. So I actually hung up and just dialed back in because I couldn't hear anybody.
Oh.
Okay, were there any other questions before we move on?
I just had one outside of everyone's comments of I can hear you. Uh, Veronica asks, when grade levels are removed, what age range is considered appropriate in the same setting?
Again, I have seen, Veronica, a wide variety. So I've seen where it's almost, you might have like 4th and 5th, or 5th and 6th, 7th and 8th type, like more, within a grade level. I also worked with a school where they had a 5th grader that was beyond genius in math, and he physically actually started going into the high school for his math courses. It was a smaller district, so it was, the elementary, the middle, and the high school were all pretty close to each other, but they had a teacher walk him over to the high school. So it really depends on what your site is comfortable with. And then also if that's going to be part of the strategic plan, how to write into the strategic plan, as well as, community buy-in. So, I know some people are like, I would never have my younger kids go to the high school, and that's fine because they can still work on high school curriculum if that's what they needed, and vice versa. You probably wouldn't send a high school student down to lower grades, but they could absolutely work on different grade level appropriate content in the classroom. So, but if you're creating like the picture I sent to you where I had up on the screen where they knocked the walls down, that was I believe 5th and 6th grade, with maybe a little bit of 4th grade as well. Okay.
Kimberly Payne asks, could you go back one slide? She wants to see the visual one more time.
Sure, no problem. Any questions about it?
And Rhosia asks, isn't personalized learning similar to academic intervention plan for each student?
Yes, you could. I mean, you could look at it that way. Absolutely. That even if, sometimes we think of intervention as a student struggling, I see it as even students who are excelling or higher achieving students. It is. You're writing, it's almost like with an IEP. You're writing an IEP for every student. Now, obviously, it doesn't have to be as in-depth as an IEP, but every student should have some kind of, if you want to call it an academic intervention plan, educational learning plan that outlines information about them, and they should also have a say in what it is. So they, like I said before, learning what type of learner they are, doing learner profiles, learning what their goals are, and it can be, short-term and long-term. But yes, absolutely. That was kind of a long-winded to answer your question, but yes. So part of it is having the plan, and then the other part is what is the classroom going to look like? Tools are you going to use to help implement personalized learning? So one of the things is, how do you even get started? And, we talk about strategic plans. I mean, again, it's not something you can just snap your fingers and it's all, it's going to happen. We have to coach our students on how to start to learn in a different way, and we have to coach our teachers. So one of the things is we look at, as important as technology is, schools need services and support to walk them through this change. So you've heard me say strategic plan a lot. We really encourage sites to come up with strategic plans for personalized learning for their students and their teachers. So one of the things that we do is we help schools with their strategic plan, but what we cover is, as you're planning and you're researching, some things to think about are these 4 areas of focus. So really looking at taking kind of what I call a gut check. So looking at your people at your site is how ready are they? You know, maybe you start with the teachers that are excited about it, and they don't have to know how to do it or be experts. The first step is finding teachers that are excited to do something different and working with them. Keeping in mind through the IMACOL, which is the International Association of Online Learning, and you look at the Teaching Blended Learning Framework, they have 4 domains for when you're working with your people, is really looking at the mindset of them, the qualities, the adaptive skills, and the technical skills, okay? Looking at your resources. What are you using on your campus? What are you already doing? We're going to talk about that in a minute, is how you can build. I know when I was teaching, it was very frustrating because it seemed like every quarter and every year we had kind of the flavor of the month. So whatever the new thing that district or administration wanted to try, and we never really gave it enough time before the next thing came along. So a lot of my colleagues, I'm not going to say I was one of them, would, why even bother learning this? Because it's just going to change again. And personalized learning isn't something that you just do. It should be, as I said, a systematic cultural change in education. So it's not like, oh, this year we're going to do personalized learning. We really want that to sustain at your site. So looking at what resources you have, what are you already doing, and how can we build to help move towards that personalized learning. And then what are your process? So start to ask yourselves, what's going to be the process for implementation? What's going to be our process for accountability? What are going to be the stages of implementation? So what's year 1 going to look like? What's year 2 going to look like? And what's year 3 going to look like? And hopefully year 1 and year 3 are going to look very different. And then again, how are you going to measure accountability so that you can make changes? So that, maybe in year 1 you learned some things, so year 2 and 3, you might have to make some tweaks to that plan, that strategic plan. And then looking at your technology. So what is the capacity for technology? Are you going to look at BYOD, which is bring your own device? Are you going to look at one-to-one? Are you going to look at COWs, which are the computers on wheels? What is going to be the use of technology? What is your internet bandwidth? Or what is the community's bandwidth? What is the, how many families outside of the home have internet? Are you going to work with businesses to maybe help provide Wi-Fi for students that might not have access to it? I worked with a school in LA Unified that most of their students did not have internet at home. And so they partnered with McDonald's that was right near the school, and they have Wi-Fi, but they allowed students to come in and work on their homework without having to buy something. So just working with how can you get creative even within your community? One of the things too, as I was mentioning, is looking at what are some of the trends in personalized learning. So taking what you might already be doing or some of the initiatives that you're already doing and building from that. So like I was saying, maybe you were doing project-based learning. Well, we don't want you to scrap that. How can you use project-based learning and build from that to make it into personalized learning? Or maybe you are already starting to work on multi-age or co-teaching or using teacher and learner partnerships, which might be even as simple start as those student-led conferences, or teachers and students and learners coming up with their academic intervention plan or educational learning plan. So taking what you're already doing or what you want to do and building from it so that it has more sustainability and buy-in from your teachers, so that the teachers and your staff and colleagues can see the connection on what they're currently doing, and so that they don't think, oh, this is just the flavor of the month and why bother and why invest in it because it's just going to change. So when we look at personalized learning tools, we look at here at School Improvement, we really suggest kind of four things. Looking at how to facilitate that transformation process. So you've heard me talk about that strategic plan, looking at the educational culture of your site, looking at what the classroom would look like. Again, using technology is a fabulous tool for personalized learning. It's not the end-all be-all, but it is a tool to help pull that agile data to get it faster. And it also makes it a useful tool for the teachers and the students to get more personalized on what they specifically need, instead of the teacher creating all of this information for each student or type of student. Looking for programs that have courses already in them with a management system or platform that is conducive for personalized learning. So looking for a platform that can provide voice and choice, that provides student choice and activities that they want to learn beyond what's already in the built-in curriculum. And then ongoing professional learning and support. So those are the 4 tools that we recommend when schools are starting, or districts or sites are starting to look at this transformation process. One of the things that, as I mentioned, that we help with, but even on your own, is in this transformation process is, again, what are the ingredients for creating that systematic professional learning plan that's going to help your teachers and your students with this pathway of personalized learning? Really making sure that the resource you're using can be individualized to meet the needs of your teachers, for those educators. Creating and following a plan, the implementation plan, the one I mentioned, that's 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, that's driven by your own strategic goals. You know, at School Improvement, we'd love to tell you, here's what we think, or any other company, here's what we think you should do, but it doesn't matter what we think we should do, because you know your own culture and where your district and site is going. So how do you take your own strategic goals and put that into your implementation plan? And then how do you message this plan to your teachers, to your staff, and to your community effectively, so that there is buy-in and support and not fear? Because you know, a lot of us teachers do not like change, so it's scary. So how do we do it slowly and correctly so it has efficacy, and then also buy-in? And then, of course, being committed to seeing the plan through. So they're, you know, making sure, yes, there's going to be bumps in the road, and how do you just adapt and learn from those? The last thing I want to talk about is, as you are out there looking, either what you have currently as technology, and then also if you're evaluating technology, is really how do you use digital curriculum for personalized learning most effectively? So one of the things that we really look at is using the Universal Design Learning Framework for personalized learning, and it's developed from the Center of Applied Technology, and it's really to determine how each learner is unique and has variability in their learning. So digital curriculum and a platform, you know, is two-dimensional. I mean, it's not like you can give speeches, it's not like it can give intense feedback, but how do you incorporate some of those 21st century skills that the students need, some of the feedback that the teacher can provide, some of that agile data that the teachers and the students need into a program, while the teachers then pulling this data and then doing ongoing activities and higher order activities. So really looking at the 3 principles of the UDL for teaching and learning, and that's access, engage, and express. So when we look at the access, is the multiple means of representation. So how in digital curriculum can you provide expression, language, symbols? So really, how do you transform the information you're trying to give to the students into usable knowledge through digital media, through audio and visual? So how do you make it engaging to them? How do you get that initial instruction to them? How do they learn by accessing those multiple means of representation? How do you get those different types of learners to engage with the digital curriculum? You also want to look at how does it in the multiple means of engagement. So how do you recruit interest? How do you sustain effort and persistence through the content? And that's partly using interactives. Does it have meaningful video? Not just video to say there's video, but meaningful video to help with that modality effect and that transfer of learning. How is their self-assessment? Does the program provide self-assessment for the students. Again, a key piece of personalized learning is students being able to self-assess of how they are doing. And then is there an opportunity for reflection? And then lastly, the multiple means of action and expression. That is through physical action. That could be through clicking, through building, through making sense of their learning, through presenting, through writing. Now, a lot of digital curriculum out there might not have that built in, but does your platform provide that through the teaching and learning? Can the teachers create activities that express the evidence of what they've learned? Okay, so those are things to start to think about as you look at the curriculum you may currently have or curriculum that you may want to start to look at, and then also the tools of the platform. Lastly, looking at, we kind of take with digital curriculum, the bullet points in black are almost all mandatory, especially when you're looking at the INACOL standards for digital curriculum. It does need to be adaptive. There should be different pathways for students. It should be flexible, so you should be able to change mastery levels and assign activities for different students for enrichment or supplemental remediation. You should be able to customize each student. You should be able to put individual study plans, or the students can create their individual study plans based on their mastery or their competencies. But more importantly, too, is what does it look like to the end user? Digital curriculum should not be an ebook. Ebooks are fantastic tools. They're also a tool that can be used in personalized learning, but it does vary from digital curriculum. So looking at what is the contrast on the screen? Does it enhance the selective perception? Does it grab the learner's attention? Are there visuals related to the big picture of the learning? Also looking at alignment, is that perpetual chunking? Can the digital curriculum, how it's presented on the screen, help the learner be focused, which then equals or equates to cognitive load versus overload? If you put too much on one screen and too many activities, you know, they might have vocabulary, and they might have to read, and they might have to watch a video all on one screen. It's cognitive overload. So the student's not sure where to focus, which then interrupts that multiple means of representation and then their engagement. The proximity is looking at the use of the space between instructional elements to help students make the connection, and then understanding the relationship with repetition is from lesson to lesson, not only in content, but how the lesson is laid out to understand that relationship with the content of what they're supposed to, the relationship and the non-relationship of the content, I should say. So where things are placed should correlate to exactly what they're supposed to learn. So sometimes in textbooks, you have, you know, you're reading along and it'll have C caption, but 4A might be on the next page. So when we look at proximity and repetition and contrast, you know, those types of things should be right by what they're expected to learn when you're talking about digital curriculum. And lastly, just to kind of look at this continuum of personalized versus when we go back to industrial with creating our workers versus thinkers. So if you look on the continuum, you know, when it's more impersonalized, we're looking at school policies that fit the needs of kind of how school has always been. When we look at instruction in an impersonal or industrial way, it's more the sit and get, it's the teacher's idea, it's teach, practice, test, and you're teaching to the masses. As we go more towards personalized and personal, when we're looking at the educational culture is, you know, can school policies and structures be designed more for the students as unique individuals? And then the learning should be, again, empowering learning experiences, critical thinking, and exploration, where students are having some of that ownership and that shift from the teacher to the student so that they really own that learning and accountability. So with that, we're almost to an hour. I haven't checked in a while of questions. What questions can I answer for you? David, I'll let you kind of be my Vanna White right now.
Sure. Here's a few questions. Veronica asked, do you have a sample implementation process to share or an example of successful implementation process from a partnering school?
We do. One of the things when we start showing other school stuff, we just have to get quick permission from them. But yes, that can be emailed out. I think there's a copy of the presentation. Is that something that we can send out to everybody, David?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, we can have that. We can also show samples of kind of what happens when creating that strategic plan as well.
Another question from Tim. How does professional learning communities fit in with personalized learning?
I think it goes hand in hand. So with those, and I've seen different professional learning communities among, again, with what different schools do. But you could create those, you can implement it with your teachers and then with your students within those PLCs, depending on which parameters you want to set. So I think it goes very well with PLCs.
From DJ, what is the time frame to curate the playlist for online content for students? And who's typically responsible for creating the online content?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, JJ, you're talking about if a school or a district or a site is creating their own content versus getting curriculum that might already be built, correct? And if you're talking about building your own curriculum, a lot of that, the time frame depends on what resources you have to create that. I've worked with schools who start their own content, and then where they ran into trouble is keeping that updated. So one of the things you have to ask yourself is, it's one thing to create the content, and you might have teachers or resources at your sites that are great curriculum developers, but do they have the time and the resources to keep that updated? What we call agile development in the curriculum world, to make it continue to be fresh for the students. If you're talking about implementing with a company, we'd be more than happy to partner with you. And then that's, the curriculum's already there, plus then whatever you and your site would like to add. And that can happen a lot faster, as well as having agile development.
Another question, what next generation personalized learning platforms have proven to be effective?
Well, one of the platforms that we would help with is we have a platform called Edivate Learn that is effective because of the fact that it has built-in curriculum that your teachers can use for K through 12, as well as those customization options that I mentioned that are essential for personalized learning, where the teachers can customize for the whole course, they can customize per student, they can create small groups, students can self-assess, they can peer collaborate, they can have voice and choice on projects and activities.
Question from Mary, what do you think of piloting in a few classrooms?
I think that's a great place to start, because sometimes this is a big ship to turn around. Again, if you're changing a cultural shift, it's not going to happen overnight. So I think it's much better to start small and have success and find out what's working and not working, and then expand it out. It also helps with buy-in from teachers and community that might be a little hesitant. So if, Mary, if let's say you're doing it in your classroom with a couple other teachers and you're having success in year one, and then year two, some of your colleagues are seeing it and they're like, wow, that's working. And you are then, it's easier for you to, as a colleague, to kind of sell it and show that it works than outsiders coming in and saying, oh yes, this works. So I think it's definitely better. We would love for people to start huge, but I think it's a great way to start. And I've seen where people start with a particular grade level. I've seen where they start with a particular site. So it just depends on what level of expansion, or grassroots, sorry, not expansion, you want to start with.
A question from Holly, how successful has this been in high schools? Do you have any examples?
Yes, so this is great in high schools because students, again, it depends where you want to start, but I've met with students that someone mentioned before when I talked about why personalized learning, they finally feel like they're getting their needs met. So one of the things with high schools to think about as well is, like, for instance, we work with a school district, it's called Weber, in a little bit outside of Salt Lake, and they have students that are doing this. They can, they can come to the school, but they're working in the digital curriculum in our platform. The teachers are there to help when they do small group instruction. So the teachers still provide a lot of choice for students, but they actually partnered as well with a local college. So students that really embraced the concept of voice and choice and pace and place, and they worked ahead and they were done. So I met with kids that were technically sophomores chronologically, but they were ready for college courses. So it really provides the different needs for students. Students that might need a slower pace, it works for them too, because they can still achieve what they need and master their competencies that they might need without all the other pressures of what's going on.
There's a new report called Meandering.
And we can provide other, I was just going to say, we can provide other resources as well. Weber's just the one that came to my mind. Sorry, go ahead, David.
This is a question from Sigrid. There's a new report called Meandering Toward Graduation, saying that students aren't prepared for college because they aren't taking specific classes or following a specific college preparation track. How does this idea correlate to the supposed benefits of personalization?
That's a good question. That's something that at we're working on, and I've even with school leaders is in finding that gap between high school and college preparation. So one of the things, like I mentioned with Weber, is students that can work ahead and getting them prepared. Another school that we worked with, it was mandatory that every high school student have to take a college level course. They partnered with a community college. So getting students prepared on that, as well as colleges starting to work and get more on board with online learning, and not just, where you never talk to the teacher, but even helping with college professors and their instructional strategies to help with more of a blended or flip type model to prepare students. So there isn't such a gap in even how to handle themselves in the learning process, as well as getting students prepared for more advanced type courses. And I think with the pace and place and how the expectations of the site and what you come up with your strategic plan, that could be something too. Are you going to partner with the higher ed institutions to even get them prepared, even if it's as simple as a college prep course of what to expect? And I'm not familiar with that article, so I'm going to make note to read it, but that's, things that we're working with at a company level. And then again, as I mentioned, what sites are working on is making more of a connection for that transition academically and behaviorally for those students, and even trickling down into middle school so they're more prepared for
it. Another question of how many different modules are on Edivate Learn? Grading, student information systems, online content?
So it's a LMS, so a learning management system with built-in curriculum. Within the curriculum, however many modules are in the curriculum depends on the course. So if it's a semester-long course, there's enough content in it to be a semester. If it's a full year course, it's enough for the full year. And then again, it comes with that learning management system that provides a grade book. You can enroll the students, and depending on what SIS you use, and if that SIS wants to open up their APIs, which most of them do, it can integrate for single sign-on with your SIS.
Another question, what minimum grade level do you recommend this model? How about ESOL students, and how can they be involved with the planning for lack of language skill?
Okay, so let's answer the first question of what's the recommended grade level. I think this can begin as low as a kindergarten. Obviously, independent learning time is going to be a little bit different than older students. I think, I've seen kindergartners work in a rotation model or the centers model where they pulled out their devices and worked, either with a learning coach, whether it's, an aide in the classroom or with the teacher, and worked independently on what they needed. That would be, maybe 10 minutes of that time, and then incorporate it with, small group instruction or the collaboration with other students. So it can be done as young as kindergarten, with assistance all the way up to 12th grade. And then what was the second part of the question?
How about students of a second language? How can they be involved with the planning with their lack of language skills?
Okay.
That's me.
And that's a tough one because it does depend on where their language acquisition is at. So, but you can use digital curriculum as a great resource for the language acquisition, because you could supplement what they're doing in the classroom, maybe at a lower reading level. But if you're studying, let's say, if it's a sixth grader and you're doing some kind of, so let's say you're doing civics class, or I'm sorry, if you're a high school student, you're doing government, but the sixth grade civics course has the same information about the Constitution at a lower grade level or a lower reading level, that might be appropriate for someone that's acquiring the language. And again, it just depends where their language acquisition level is. So that might be more of an intermediate student. If it's someone who has zero language acquisition, like it's a newcomer or a limited English proficiency student, you can still be involved if you have a translator or to help just, again, setting those goals. It might be you're going to work on 2 words this week, 3 words this week, whatever goal you're expected to have for the students, and then help them prepare for that. So it does vary on their language acquisition, but I still think they can have some kind of part in their learning for personalized learning, despite their language acquisition.
Another question from DJ. Is Edivate Learn aligned with the Texas teaching standards, or is it with Common Core?
Oh, it has Texas standards embedded. So there's an ability to go in and click your state standards and import just those state standards. So it has individual state standards. We also have it aligned to Common Core as well. But it would meet Texas's needs as well.
That's all the questions I have right now. I'm sure a few more will chime in. This webinar is being recorded, and I will send you, all the attendees, a link to this recording, and it will also be available on our website on schoolimprovement.com/webinars.
I appreciate everyone joining today. You guys were very interactive. I think of all the ones that I've done over the years, this has been the most collaborative group, so I sincerely appreciate it. It makes it more fun for you to interact. I think for next time, we'll make sure that the chat box works, but I sincerely appreciate you guys engaging with me and spending the last hour with us.
Great. Thank you very much, Jennifer. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. You all have a fabulous day. Oh, go ahead.
I do have one poll. If for those of you who are left, just a quick poll on your thoughts on the webinar. Just, was the webinar worth your time?
Vote yes.
For those of you who may have individual questions, you can send them. You can either type them in here and we'll answer them, or you can send them to me or Jennifer. I will provide that information on the email that you'll get after attending this webinar. All right. Thank you, everyone.